Konnichiwa, friends. I am Sekai X Arts and Animations, and today I am revisiting drawing in a semi-realistic style by drawing my character from Hogwarts Legacy. If you watched my The Problem Every Writer Faces video, then you know that I am a huge Harry Potter fan, and as such was elated when Hogwarts Legacy got released. Now I'm not super far into it, even though it came out like over a year ago, but I really like it. There's just one thing that bothers me just a little bit, and that's that my character, Asta Looming, seems to render really weird. This is her. Now I don't say this to insult the creators or anything, I just thought my girl looked a little bit like a potato and thought I would squeeze some content out of it. Now, one thing that may contribute to Asta looking kind of strange is that I play Hogwarts Legacy on the Nintendo Switch. I know a lot of people say that the Switch's rendering is super bad because it's not as powerful as the PlayStation, but honestly, to me, it still looks really good. And the only times I can tell that it's worse than the PlayStation is when I look at a picture of them side by side. Plus, I play for the story, not the graphics, otherwise I would have bought a PC long ago. Even with this in mind though, I've looked up Reddit pages of people on the PlayStation who say that they thought the main character, especially the female model, looked a little bit strange too. On a different note, Hogwarts Legacy has a hyper-realistic style, and that's not gonna happen for me. I did a practicing stuff I don't want to video on realism a while back, and anyone who watched that knows that I struggle a lot with realism, so I'm just gonna be satisfied if I can achieve like sort of semi-realism. I'm trying to set realistic standards, okay? Now when I designed my character, or any character in any game, I pretty much never make them look like me or name them after myself. This is for a few reasons. Number one, I like to think of the main character as a vessel I'm experiencing the story through, rather than a self-insert. Number two, I am myself in real life, and I think it's more fun to experience being another person. It's like how in D&D, I'm always confused as to why so many people play humans. You're already a human in real life. Don't you want to be something more than you already are? Not to hate on people who play human characters. I mean, the character I'm playing right now is a human, so obviously I don't take this too seriously. But I do never make the main character myself, which kind of ties into number 3. I like using characters in games like this as inspiration for characters and stories of my own. I feel like if I make the main character too much like myself, I'm restricting them to who I am, rather than who they could be. That sounds a lot more philosophical than it is. As I was drawing this, something occurred to me, another possible reason that I might struggle with realism. In my practice video, I noted that my character's eyes were way too far apart. After that, I continued to notice that trend across my semi-realistic work. Well, I may have thought of a reason why. The general rule of thumb of facial proportions is that the eyes are one eye width apart and the corners of the mouth cut through the middle of the eye. Well, upon studying my own face, that's not true of me. I have kind of odd proportions in terms of that rule, actually. They don't look odd, but they are different. My eyes are a bit more than one eye width apart. The corners of my mouth align with the inner corners of my eyes instead of the middle. Despite knowing this rule, my biggest reference for drawing realistic faces is my own face, whether I like it or not. Even if I don't use my face as a reference photo, it is the face I see most often. As such, I think I've been subconsciously drawing my character's proportions a little bit closer to my own. After discovering that, I paid closer attention in this drawing, adjusting the eyes when I realized that once again I drew them too far apart. I changed the nose when I noticed I'd made it too flat, and just generally did my best to draw Asta how I imagined her, not how I am. Okay, on a different note, if you haven't noticed, my character is not wearing the traditional Hogwarts school robes. Well, this is for a couple reasons. One, I've already been inspired by the Hogwarts Legacy main character and wanted to be able to use this illustration for that story eventually, and also, there are a lot of clothes in Hogwarts Legacy. For a very long time, I did wear the traditional Slytherin robes with an elegant uniform underneath. But then, one day while out in Hogsmeade, I bought this green overcoat. It might be the draconic female long coat, but I'm not sure. Either way, as soon as I put it on my character, for some reason, I felt like it clicked. I felt that this was part of her signature wardrobe. She would wear this coat all the time. I'm not quite sure why I felt this way, but now whenever I imagine Asta or take her anywhere in the game, she's wearing this green coat, so I thought it would be most true to my character to draw her in that coat. I took some creative liberty with the design though, so I can make it more interesting. Here in this part, I'm starting what probably gave me the most trouble, which was the hair. I looked up so many tutorials on semi-realistic hair, studied so many pictures, and finally found a process that I think looks okay but took a really long time to figure out. I didn't end up using any of the processes in the videos I watched, but I did take note of the way Feng Zhao draws hair and adjusted it to fit my needs better. First, I adjusted my round brush to have tapered edges like the syrup brush, which I guess makes it not a round brush anymore. But anyway, I scribbled in some shadows with that, smudging them with the wet sponge brush. After that, I took my syrup round brush again and drew in the hard shadows and strands. And finally, I took the black burn brush and gently drew on top of everything to make it look a little bit more like hair. From there, I would just pick out sections of the hair to do this to and color and render this according to the direction the hair was growing. Even with this process down though, the hair alone still took me about 9 hours and was genuinely just painstakingly slow. This is another reason I just don't like drawing in realism. It takes forever. A drawing usually takes me about 3, sometimes 4 hours. Before this drawing, my record for longest amount of time it took to draw something was about 8.5 hours, and it had like 13 characters in it because it was a submission for a fan art contest. This piece alone took me in total 18 hours to make. 18 hours! Now obviously that wasn't all in one sitting, but either way, that is a super long amount of time, at least for me, and kind of makes me want to never try realism again. I could have made 5 other pieces in the time this monstrosity took me. I mean, props to realism artists, I cannot do what you all do. Now, maybe 18 hours isn't a lot to you all. I've seen time-lapse videos of people who did a piece in like 30 hours or 70 hours or whatever, which is a lot longer than this piece took me. But usually when people do drawings like that, they're like really impressive, hyper-realistic drawings, and I'm not even going to attempt that yet. I just think it's a shame how long this took, that's all. And as I force myself to practice realism, I really hope I get faster. Now, as I am taking literal hours to draw the hair here, I do want to talk a bit about how I think this attempt went in comparison to others that I've done. Now, I'm not super close to being finished here, but if you watched my practicing stuff I don't want to realism video, you'll probably be able to tell that this is already a much more successful attempt, and I think a few things contributed to this, so let's talk about them. Number 1 is that I liked this drawing a lot more and felt more passionately about it. In my practicing realism video, the character I drew there was just some random girl that was the subject of a drawing. She wasn't a character of mine or, to put it harshly, anyone special. She merely existed within what I needed her to be for that video, and while I don't think there's anything wrong with that, it meant I cared about how she turned out a lot less. A problem I plan on tackling in a future video, and one that I think most artists can relate to, is ruining your character when you have to draw them. Now, what does that mean? Basically, I think that most people have a picture in their head of what they imagine their character looking like, be it a very clear picture or just a vague idea. When some people sit down to draw this character, they get it right and move on, but some of us draw something wildly different from what we pictured. Even more, this very non-accurate drawing all of a sudden replaces the fuzzy image we had in our head, and essentially ruins our mental image of that character. Now, the character in my realism video didn't have that mental image I was afraid of ruining. I had no clear idea of what she was supposed to look like, so instead of adjusting this or moving that around to look more like her, I just rolled with whatever my hands decided to do. As a result, not only did she look kind of blank and boring, but I didn't catch or care about the mistakes I was making. On the other hand, Asta is a very important character to me. Not only do I love her within the Hogwarts Legacy universe, but I already told you that she's inspired another story within me. I had that mental image for her. It wasn't super clear, but it was something I didn't want to ruin. I would draw this or that part of her over and over until I felt like it looked like how I imagined her face. If I thought that something didn't look quite right, I became determined to fix it because I wanted to do the character I love justice. I wasn't just going to let my mistakes slide, and I think that was really helpful in the resulting image. Another thing that really helped me was using references. I mentioned in my realism video that I didn't use any references, and I should have because it shows. Her eyebrows look really strange, her lips look like jelly, her eyes are too far apart, and the planes of her face just aren't shaded correctly. When I drew Asta though, I gathered up a lot of references. I of course had her in-game model to look at, but I also looked up how to draw semi-realistic lips. I looked at pictures of people who I thought had a similar face to her. I looked up lighting references, the list goes on. Now, I'm usually a huge advocate for using references when drawing. You can't remember what everything looks like all the time, but I think the reason I didn't use references for my first drawing was, again, because I didn't care too much about the result. But references are important and a free resource for you to use, so please use them. Don't neglect your references. Lastly, and this one kind of goes hand in hand with the second point, but I did research into the human body. Not just how does light affect the face, but what are the undertones? How do eyebrows grow? How does the ear function? If you gain a deeper understanding of what you're drawing, you're less likely to forget stuff. For example, if I were to try to just draw a clock without understanding how it works, I might forget the little screw in the center. However, if I do research, I know that the function of that piece there is to hold the hands together, but I'm less likely to forget it because I know its purpose, and that if it didn't exist, the hands would fall off. Now that's a strange example maybe, but let's apply it to the face. The eyelid forms where the skin of the skull and the skin of the eye overlap. Just like when two folds of clothes meet, they crease. Now if I didn't know this, I might have forgotten this part of the face, especially because I don't have an eyelid crease because I'm Chinese and most Chinese people don't have creases, but most English people do have creases, so it's important to include them. So to sum everything up, being passionate about your art really helps it to look better. This isn't possible to do all the time, but if you can, try to get excited about it. You should, without a doubt, use references. I promise you guys it's not cheating to look at a picture, really. And lastly, doing some basic research can help you understand your subject better. And it doesn't have to be like multiple sources, professional encyclopedias either. Just the first couple results on Google should be good enough. Another thing that I think helped me a lot when drawing this is to take off bite-sized chunks. Now obviously you want to think about your picture as a whole because that's how outsiders are going to view it, but you don't have to work on all of it all at once. I've watched people's process videos where they take and draw everything and render everything all together, and that's fine and works for them. It's easy for them to think about shading and then lighting instead of hair and then clothes. But for me, I found that working on each part and giving them each their own time really helped. This allowed me to really focus on hair and get its look, and its process down right, instead of jumping between rendering hair and rendering skin and rendering clothes. To anyone who's ever looked at a person, skin looks different from clothes and hair, which means you have to draw those things differently. So again, instead of jumping around processes, I felt like it was easier to stick to one thing, finish it, and then switch processes to another, so I didn't have to interrupt myself. It's also nice to draw in chunks of time as well. This piece took 18 hours, but obviously not 18 consecutive hours, because I think that would have genuinely killed me. Instead, I drew for a couple hours over a few days. This helped me mostly just to stay sane. No one should sit in front of a screen non-stop for 18 hours. I found that if I sit in front of my iPad or computer for too long, I get a major fuzzy headache. So I've resolved to, whenever I can, do electronics for an hour and then get away from them for an hour and go back and forth. And this has really helped me a lot with that feeling, because it's just not healthy for you to stay in front of that bright electronic screen for that long. In addition, I talked just a minute ago about staying excited about your drawing. I don't know about you all, but if I work on a piece for a long time, especially longer than expected, no matter what it is, I'll get a bit grumpy. Well, if I work in shifts of a couple hours, it helps me to stay excited. Now, I was really excited to do this drawing and managed to stay excited because I broke it up into pieces. During my breaks, I would think about what I would do when I'd sit back down, but not allowing myself to do so until my break hour was up helped the drawing feel more exclusive and, therefore, alluring. Another happy plus of taking breaks is that it doesn't feel like as much time as it is. It might still feel like a long time, but at least for me, it didn't feel like 18 hours. I also don't have 18 hours to sit and draw. I've got other stuff to do too. Another thing to keep in mind while drawing is that it's okay for it to look bad, especially in the early stages. Now if you're a beginner, this goes for the piece as a whole. While you're still learning, unless you're just naturally talented, your pieces might not look great, or as great as you want them to. And that's fine, it's all part of a journey. Yeah, it'll suck when your characters look like they belong in a kindergarten classroom, but if you want to get good, you have to be bad first. Failure is part of any creative process. In terms of just one drawing, it's still okay for certain parts to not look great. As I'm messing around with the vase here, there are shading techniques and placements that I'm trying that genuinely look terrible, but I'm still learning realism. I have to experiment with things that look bad so I know what looks good. It's okay, good even, to mess around with this and that. Drawing things that aren't beautiful helps you to know what is. You can always go in and fix it later. That being said, I'm not giving you permission to just give up. If part of your drawing looks noticeably worse than the rest, then you should try to fix it. You'll never improve if you don't try to fix what's bad. I heard once the advice that art is only as good as its weakest part, which stinks, but it's true. If you have this beautiful image, but one part's a little bit off, that's what people's eyes will be drawn to. Most non-artists look at an image as a whole, not in pieces, so even if your rendering and lighting is really pretty, if the hand you drew, for example, looks really weird, they're going to notice that it looks weird. It's just like with AI art. Usually the rendering is really good, but people can tell it's AI based on the little bits that look wonky. So yes, it's okay to experiment with stuff that looks bad, but if you notice that your eyes are just a little too far apart after drawing them all nice, I'm sorry friend, you're gonna have to erase and draw them again. I also want to be clear that I'm not saying making ugly art is bad. It's great to experiment with things you don't find aesthetically pleasing. Heck, I just did a video a second ago about compiling the opposite of what I like into an art style. What I mean is that if you're trying to make your holy grail of art pieces, then you should work your hardest to make every part look good and not just give up on that one part, because it's okay for art to be ugly. If you don't care about what people think, then it's fine to leave it, but people will notice. For the eyes, I basically just did what I always do with the eyes, with little adjustments, adding things here and there and taking away other things to make it more realistic. I may do an eye tutorial one day, we'll see, but if you've seen any of my art, you'll see that my eyes are very sparkly and have a lot of bright, saturated colors in them. Well, that's not a great representation of real life. I used my own style for the placements of the lights and shadows, but definitely made the highlights simpler and the iris less saturated. Usually when I draw the iris, I will pick one color and then a couple what I call adjacent colors, even though they're not always adjacent. Then take those colors and highlight and add detail with them, and it helps add interest to the eye. However, if your eye in real life is green, then you're probably not going to have a lot of blue or yellow in your eye unless you're heterochromatic, even though that's how I would add detail in my own style. So again, I placed the shadows the same, but restricted my color palette for a more realistic effect. Now I do think I could have pushed the shadows and lights maybe just a little bit farther. I think her pupil might just be a little bit too light and is giving her kind of a blind man effect, but it's not so bad that I think it needs to be changed. I'm just going to keep it as a note in the back of my mind for next time. I also think her eyeliner might be just a little bit too harsh, especially because I don't imagine her as someone who wears a lot of makeup. But then again, it's not a mistake that I see as so egregious that it's worth going back in and messing up and then redrawing. As an artist, it's important to be able to tell the difference between mistakes that need to be fixed and things that just need to be noted upon for next time. Okay, shifting gears here to clothes rendering. Here, I want to try for different textures on my clothes. I want the shirt to look like cotton, I want the coat to look like linen, and I want the gold trim to look shiny, etc. This is another thing that I neglected to do in my original attempt. Everything was rendered basically the same. I scribbled in some shadows and then Gaussian blurred them, which not only looked bad, but is also not how clothes are shaded. On her shirt, I just did my basic shading, shadows, deeper shadows, and a barrier of pink, but on the coat, I tried to use a more painterly brush and blender to try to give it a more linen-like texture. On her tie, I really wanted it to look shiny, so I put in my shadows and highlights, but I blended them with a round brush instead of an airbrush. Alright, as we're getting to the end here, I have a confession to make. I used clip art for the background. I wanted to draw one in, but I was so done at this point that I just gave up. Now, I don't feel that using clip art is necessarily wrong. Yes, you should learn to draw backgrounds, but for me, that wasn't the point of this exercise. I feel that it's only wrong to use clip art when you try to trick people into think that you drew it. You have to tell people and be upfront with them with the fact that you did not draw it. No, don't wait until someone asks and then say that you didn't draw it. Tell people either in the video or the description or the comments or whatever you can to make it clear. The only reason you wouldn't say so is if you're intentionally trying to deceive people. So I'm just gonna be honest with you all here and tell you that I gave up. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Okay, so here's my final result. I'm actually fairly happy with how this came out. It's still not hyper-realism, but I don't know if I'll ever get there, but it's an improvement on my first attempt, which is all I can ask for. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you all in the next one.